Well, thanks, Uwe, so much for doing this, for sharing your knowledge.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, and thanks everybody for coming. So I think we just definitely have to talk about, what's nice about reflected light. Then what the technical part about is the usage, what makes it easier in sometimes, and obviously workflow. I think for me it was obvious. For me, the reflector thing started with Christian when I started working with him. But generally reflected light, how did you get about it? When did that become a part of where you said that's a trick in your sleeve you like to use?
Yeah, for me it was the first thing was to get some distance, to have a better fall off, like through rooms or something. So, and that was the first point when I started to use reflectors, because sometimes, if you're on not super big shows, you need bigger fixtures to get a lot of distance, and you have to bring them right high to get the right angle. And then I started to use reflectors to get distance and to have a better fall off in the room. But at one point I got pissed because the reflectors that are out there in the rentals, you will never have 4 that are the same. You don't have even 2 that are the same number.
I think that's a major thing, right, with using reflectors. What we had before, you go into a rental, then you actually have to look at the quality of the stuff to decide. We're talking about Roscoe, all the stuff we got out there. That's been a great tool, but it doesn't have the consistency all around. Did you use mirrors? Obviously we're talking about pre-Lightbridge stuff. Did you use mirrors before for that trick to get more distance?
Yeah, I used mirrors, but for me the character was too harsh normally. I used mirrors and then I softened it again, and so it was, in the end, it was a big construction, and yeah. So, and at one point, it's not that long ago, let's say 2 years, I started with Euroflectors and realized that it's very calculatable what they're doing. So I got into them.
Yeah, there were 2 topics there. One is obviously Lightbridge, to say you get consistency in your surfaces. So no matter what you do or which rental you go to, you get that. But the other thing you touched on earlier, I think, is really interesting, to say the controllable of it. When you have to go so far away, you don't get the control over the room. How has that been with you? Take, for example, this example. You've got windows and you've got reflectors outside. What did you find for yourself as a good distance from lamp to reflector, reflector to window? What worked for you there the best?
Let's say in this case, we had this like a ceiling, a wide ceiling, to get some fill light in. So in that case, the distance and the height of the reflectors was eliminated by the ceiling, because we wanted to have a fast change of character there and to have a good height. And normally, for me, it's always, let's say, it's from the light to over the reflector into the room. Normally, like this big bulbs, it should be at least 15 to 20 meters away. So, from my feeling, to have like a fall off. It depends on the size of the room, because normally it's always good to have a fall off through the room that is like at 1.5 stop maximum. Yeah. So for me, normally it's like that. This distance, it works well.
It's 2 things, right? It's one thing how far you actually get virtually the light source away, keeping the light on the ground going into the reflector. And the other thing is, to say we don't want any fall off isn't true either, right? So when you walk to the window, you want to have the feeling you're walking into brightness, which is a really interesting example with your overhead that you have there, because it seems actually kind of short to just putting up a standard butterfly, so you got some space for the reflectors in the back, right?
Yeah, the reason, that was a special reason, because that was very versatile, because we had Molton on top, and we can, like, in 15 minutes change it to a night box. So that was the reason we built that, and it's quite short. We at least can get some angle for the sunlight. So that was the reason it was that size. And also, if you go low angle inside, that you don't hit it. And we don't have butterflies for that to have not even more stands out there.
I mean, it makes sense, no? So if you're looking outside the window on low angles, you just can move the reflectors around much easier than moving the light sources itself.
Yeah.
Do you tend, I mean, it looks like the light sources are kind of far away from the wall. I always kind of push them as far as I could to the wall. Was there a reason to keep them so far away?
To be honest, this is a little, maybe a misunderstanding, because the 9Ks down there, they are off. It's, you see, there are ACLs standing here, and that were hitting the reflectors. You know, that was to create the best distance for them.
Okay, so you were raking them from the side, which is interesting because, like, I mean, the reflectors obviously work, even if it's not like, you know, the 45 degrees, whatever it comes in.
Yeah.
So you're kind of raking them. But in this case, you were taking care that one reflector wasn't doing a shadow on the next one, right? The way you stack.
Yeah, exactly. And we couldn't, you know, we couldn't put it in the perfect angle because we couldn't create the distance, and the fixture would be seen through the window. So that was, let's say, not the perfect workflow, but it did what we wanted to have.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's always trying to do so many multiple things at the same time. What you're saying, like with night to daytime, so we're always just kind of...
And it's also, what I liked is what you normally don't get, because we like always try to control as much as we can. And if you control a lot, normally you don't have this, like, I call it happy accidents. So you don't get some light that you don't want. And in that case, it was funny because, you know, some reflectors got hidden by two fixtures, and so they did something funny inside. And for me, it was like, it felt very comfortable then, because I think for me, it's also, if you are in a studio, it's sometimes everything's like perfect, but it's not like a perfect world. And in this case, it's much more that maybe, you know, you have a house on the other side with a window, and that is also reflecting the sun and makes little highlights inside. And that was nice in the setup, that we had this happy accidents.
I mean, it's generally something I've found. I mean, now that we've gone through this wave of, you know, soft light and soft boxes, they're so technical. So it's really, you know, the work you put into it to get something natural back out of it. I mean, but it comes back to this main topic of using reflectors. What is actually natural light, and why does it look natural? And I totally agree. You know, at points it's like, if it's too perfect, if you look at natural light, the way it comes in, there's always multiple shadows, multiple colors and stuff going on. Do you look for that? Or is it just something during the workflow of changing lights, you see something, you cry stop and you look for it? Or is it something in your research work you look for too? Or
You mean for?
This natural light, where you say, I want these little hits, I want to use light sources that aren't perfect, like ACLs, for example.
Yeah, that's true. They are really not perfect, but yeah, they have a special character, let's say. Yeah, and they work quite well with the reflectors, because you can get, you know, these parallel beams that are very natural, and it's also, for me and the reflectors, a big thing. You know, you have this like big surface, like 1 meter, and you have like a very parallel beam. For me, that felt very natural, because, you know, if the sun's out there, there's normally no spread.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's like, my intuition was always to say, let's put the light as far away as possible. But it's interesting, with Niels told me that, Niels Meyer some time ago, he said he always puts them on cranks to go closer to the light source, or go further away again, to kind of say, I want more spread, I want more spot, to give it a feeling more of the parallelity, because that obviously has a lot to do with how far your light source is away, how much is actually hitting it. Do you kind of tend to do your setups too, so you got the chance? I always did it, I didn't have enough exposure, so I just went in a little bit closer. I wasn't so much looking for the flood spot. Did you run into stuff like that?
No. In the most cases, you know, the locations are giving so many things that you don't have so much choice, let's let's say, you know, or the technique that you are carrying with you. But for me also, it's, from my feelings, if you go as far away to have this parallel beam, you have to go really far away, and then you have to use really big bulbs. And in this setup, you can create the beam like this with less distance.
Two questions came up for me. One is using ACL bulbs, right? Because obviously on a short distance, you'll see multiple shadows and stuff. Are you using the reflectors to diffuse that as well, to get it into one source, or you just try to take it far enough away to avoid that, so you can use diffusion 1 or whatever, for example?
Yeah, we, this setup, that was one of the reasons was that we were like mainly working with the ACLs as the sunlight, but it was, we were like there for 2 weeks. And so we wanted to create, in an easy way, different styles. So sometimes we just like had a gel, like a half soft frost in front of the ACLs to get a little more overcast, or we're using them directly and hitting really hard so that the multiple shadows of the bulbs really doesn't matter in the end, or we go far away. So we're like trying a lot different styles on that set.
I mean, that's another thing, right? Because you have this window, and the further you go away, the more you're limited what you can reach without moving, and keeping the reflectors so close actually still gives you access over the room, no? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you just easily can like pan or tilt it a little bit, and it changes a lot inside, you know.
I mean, you were saying when you say perfect tool, right? It is a very precise tool. Yeah. Has it been for your guys, or women, or whoever's working with you on set, been a thing of saying, understanding that those little subtle changes make a big difference?
Yeah. So, and the thing is, you get a feeling for it. You know, that normally you are like a little bit more. You work a little bit rougher, maybe. I don't know how to. Yeah. But then you know, your muscles are already there, that you just tighten a little bit, and I would say that's not a big issue. And also for me, what sometimes is better, because you know the yoke is exactly on the same level as the light source, the reflector.
Can you explain it?
Yeah, if you have a light, you know, then the yoke is here. And if you pan it, you know, this character is quite different than this. It's much more exact, you know, because you are panning and tilting around really the angle that you are working on. And with the yoke, you don't, because, you know, the source is away from the yoke. No.
Yeah. So that's another thing, just pure physics, right? If you light into a reflector and you've got a big surface, you're tilting it. It's like if this is the reflector, right? And I'm moving it, virtually light source is back here, right? So if I'm moving the reflector, the light source moves with it, just like this, right? So the bigger your surface is, the more you're actually moving a light source. That's the reason you can use one window, you have the feeling the light's going in that direction, or the lamp's over there, it's going in that direction. But at the same time, what Uwe is saying is if you're pivoting off the center too much, suddenly your light moves too much too. So that's something to look out for, to have this nice center. No?
If you would, it's like with a camera, you know, if you would put your sensor too far away from the head, then you are like panning like this and not like this. Yeah. And this sometimes helps a little to, for my feeling, but of course all these things are very emotional.
Well, let's hope so. It's light, right? Has to be. I mean, that's the reason we made this rail at the back. So you actually have the possibility to be pivoting from the center, and you just offset it if you don't have enough space. But then again, you will really start to see the difference,
Yeah.
But this intuitive tool, I just try to push onto it again. Was it like your crew just was using it and you were saying, no, just it goes slower or faster? Or did it take them a time? Or was there like during prep when you showed them for the first time the handling, obviously the scratch and everything? Was there a curve there?
I started with the 1 meter ones. So for the crew was like a normal reflector that you get from the rental. And then I guess they learned that it's a little bit different, like the character is different and it's more precise. And when I got into the smaller reflectors, then I don't know, maybe they had already a feeling what it's doing. So but I didn't ask them, and they were not complaining. And normally, if they're not complaining, it's fine, you know.
I mean, you don't see it so much like, for example, lighting out inside, but inside when you're using the reflectors that they're spill light free makes a huge difference in terms of, you know, what you do, what gear you use. How have you been using that they're spill? Because out here obviously it wouldn't matter, but
Yeah.
inside it does matter. Has that changed your workflow in locations?
I don't know. I'm not so sure about it. I think, yes, maybe intuitive. You know, it's nothing that I was thinking about. So, but when the reflectors came into my mind, there were a lot of let's say problems with things that came up that I realized that was an issue I had, and I couldn't really solve it super well, and now I can, you know, because for different reasons.
Can you give an example, just for, you have a picture for it?
Yeah, for example, last year we were like shooting on the ISS. It was on the stage, not on the original location, unfortunately, of course. And we had one situation where we needed a little light on a special position, and it was really like there was absolutely no space. So it was like, I don't know, maybe 20 by 20 centimeters or a little bit more, I don't know. Yeah, and it was, maybe we could have rigged something there, but because the actor was coming too close, that would be too obvious then. And then we used it really, we could easily rig a reflector so that we could, you know, it's like this thick, so we can really go tight into the corner, and then we hit just with an orbiter with a projection lens and really like put it just on the reflector. So these things I'm using a lot, you know, to even normal fixtures can't do it. I have now in my mind, oh, maybe I can do it with a Lightbridge reflector.
Yeah, plus the Lico obviously, which is just, I think, amazing inside because it's going to cut down the blades that you don't have an issue, right?
Or sometimes as an eye light, it's, you know, too. I like it as an eye light because it's in one angle it has a good blink, so and has a nice surface, so that is what I like too.
How was it working with the DP? Obviously not having the reflectors there for him to get used to it.
It was, he didn't like it in the beginning. He was not so in reflected light. But then we had one issue. There was the problem that we had to cut all the trees to get the right distance. So, and then we used the reflectors to create the distance without cutting the trees.
It's the same thing again, no? It's about saying get more distance, but again, it's about you use the small overhead, no, to actually get enough space.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the setup that convinced the DP, because we had a picture and we had to like bling it a little bit because it's an important thing in the movie. So I couldn't show the result. And we saw the ceiling all the time, and we would not. It was not possible to get like a fixture there, and then we could put the mirror there, and then we had a little Lico that was lying underneath some molten and was hitting it, and then we could push this picture, and so the DP was like, do you really think that works? We need something really smart. And then he saw it and was like, oh wow. And then he realized it, and so we started using it in the ISS as well. And then we were at one point going to Morocco to location work. And then he said, yeah, do we have reflectors? I said, yeah, the rental there, they have some reflectors. No. I want the Lightbridge ones.
Okay, cool.
But because he's like a control freak, like we all are, and so he realized that he exactly knows what's happening. You know, if he says I'm starting with the diffusion 2, and if we go to the 3, it's not something else that you maybe like or maybe not. So you exactly know what's going to happen if you use it.
Yeah, I think for me that was the key when we first started working with them, to say we need a fast workflow. And we can't get beautiful images if we're not fast, right? Yeah. And to say you can go now from 0 to 4 was just, and if it's too hard, you swap back again. And to have this consistency, diffusion 2 is always going to be diffusion 2 everywhere around the world. Yeah. It won't change. And I think that's the reason a reason why we then decided to do different sizes too and do smaller ones, exactly for hiding stuff. Sometimes it's really great, yeah.
And in this case, it was funny because we rigged it with gloves, and because then it was a little bit too gallery style, and I like creamed my hands and touched it a little bit to break it at some point, to make it, because it was a cabin somewhere in the woods. So, and then we have like a perfect light on the picture, and then we like. Happy accidented a little bit.
But I think that's the most important part of it. It's a tool. This is not a religion, this is not the way you light, this is just another tool in your pocket to do something, and however what it takes to work. But it also proves the point that when it comes to, you know, how many scratches, how dirty can it be? I mean, my crew never used gloves, they hated them. Or they used them and then they used them on the stands too, and then the gloves were oily, and then they went onto the reflectors. So that didn't really work, and we just cleaned them at some point. But you can get away with it a long time. But again, if you really start to heavily, like here, paint with them.
Yeah.
Then it's a good thing to do. And you know, it's not an issue. If you clean at the end of the day, it's gonna be fine. Yeah. Same like putting tape on them on the harder ones. Yeah. I mean, is there a time where you combine like reflectors and direct light?
Yes, I don't have a picture with me, but there was, we combined the ACLs and the diffusion 1, because there was like an angle we had to shoot under the table, and it was not possible to get on this position with the light, but with the reflector, and so we combined it, and that worked quite well. Yeah. So it was even was good to have it a little bit softer, because there was some action going on the table. Yeah. Normally you don't light under the table.
But that's the thing, right? And I think that's one of the major tricks of using mirrors or reflectors, is that you get angles you usually can't get because of ingoing angle to outgoing angle. Yeah. No? Yeah. Do you sometimes double reflect as a way to use it? Because I always had the feeling at some point I just always started even outside going double, just to get that extra, something was different there. Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe I did it, but I don't know. Yeah. Sometimes I grab with a smaller one to kick a little bit, you know. Like this is just a setup, and then you put like a 15 or 7 centimeters in the corner or somewhere, and then you hit a little flower, or I don't know.
Just to point it out, this, for example, what's hitting Uwe right now is a diffusion 2, and it's in the Stera, in the Matthews stand. And the thing is, what happens is with the diffusion 2, it's already really diffuse, as you can see. But the great thing is, you see it's not in his face. So it's actually just hitting the close and then coming up, which is the major thing about the reflectors. You don't need a topper. Yeah. And that was, I think, for me in the workflow first, that the crews, when we set up a light, they were always bringing in flags to say, we need to cut this. We don't want it on the face, we need to cut this. And now the workflow changes to say, you just tilt it down. Yeah. And it's beautiful. I don't know.
And it's always good if there's no light in my face.
Well, that goes for all of us, but
from a special age. Yeah. But there's also, let's see, I have one thing that it was impossible to do it with a normal fixture in this setup. that was the Soyuz capsule, and we had like this little hole, and we had 2 camera operators in front of it, and I think 4 guys inside, or 3. So if you put the light in the right distance, there would be always shadows, you know, from the camera operators, or I don't know, group guys or somebody, because they have to work there. And there was like a super small space that was free in this hole. And so then we hit an orbiter in a diffusion 2, and so we had long distance to get it in there, so that we had a good fall off, and the camera operators weren't like a problem, yeah.
Just to understand it better, so you were lighting above their heads to get into?
No, I was like, when it's, let's say the capsule was here, and here was like the capsule was here, and here was the opening. I lit in this direction. Okay. So because, you know, there was a lot of people and sound guys and stuff, and then we had like, and so we could also put the reflector, we hadn't to use it like this, you know, so the surface, also the angle helped us to keep the surface small in a way. Yeah. So we could pass this little gap, but still the surface of the reflector was, I don't know, it was 50 or 25, I'm not sure yet, but it was a good surface, so you don't have like this spotty light there.
Yeah. But it's, I think, just something to point out always again is too, even if this is a diffusion 2 and it's soft, the smaller the surface, the more punchier it gets again. And of course it depends, right? If you just think about looking at the reflector straight on, it's 50 by 50, but if you turn it, it becomes like 50 times 25, right? So you reduce the size. So obviously, you figure out that.
But you still have the surface, you know?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Cool. Yeah, let's go through your pictures.
So that's, for me, that's a typical thing, you know, that's for every movie. There was also in, I think, 2,000 meters height, a farmhouse. You could only reach it with a normal car. And so we had like a small package, because we don't want to go with like 25 cars from electrics. And so to create some distance, to have like a sun is falling out there, we used it just to create distance there, you know, because the room was very small, and we couldn't really say we take different pictures with us, so we took a vortex, so we know, okay, we can have it with a snapback or with an octa, so we create it, or we can, even with an acrate, we can bounce it, and it works on the reflector very good.
I mean, looking at this, what are your light sources that you go for the reflectors? Are there more special light sources, or you just use what on the truck, or how do you think about that?
I would say normally I like the most to have projection lenses. So, but you know, that's like Nikos. That is because you don't have spills somewhere, so it's quite exact. But in the end, I realized that this really doesn't matter. You can use everything. For example, this is a case, we had this Vortex 8 with a snapback, and that was like a soft fill eye light from the outside. We had it on this floor stand, but then we had a different setup, and we had sometimes quick changes there, and then we wanted to have a little bit of different character. And we need a little bit more punch that is going through the room, but we don't want to build something completely new. So we just throw the vortex on the ground and brought in one reflector, and the character was different. So it was very handy to get a different character and just adding one to, so not bringing another light, or I don't know, you know.
I think that at the end of the day, what the workflow, what's so important about it, that it's so versatile. You just go with the flow you have, and you start to add in, no?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was first at Manuel Billeter, who did, you know, Jessica Jones and all that stuff. He came to us and said, I just want to use the sky panel. But he was using like diffusion 1s and maximum diffusion 2s to get a little bit more control from the soft source. Have you found the same thing for you?
Yeah. For example, with the Vortex 4, it's more or less sometimes the same reason. Yeah. So you get a little more control, and also for me, it's so funny because you have a fixture that is, I don't know, costs 5,000 euros, and then you are reflecting it over, you know, some aluminium foil from the supermarket, and you know, yeah. So for me, it makes no sense to have. If I work with like fixtures that are in maximum quality, to not work with reflectors that are doing exactly the same. They are hitting actors or something that are not the best that you can have.
I think that's important about the precision tools, because we have to be able always to react to every circumstances, like having them in wind and rain or whatever it is, and we just can't worry about gear at that point, which is super important. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all about the speed, you know. For if you're on a big show, so for example, on the last show, there was the crew costs were $500 in a minute, you know, and then you know somebody's running and brings a reflector because you want reflected lights, and you realize, oh no, it's a crappy one, you know. Then he's going back and bring a new one, so it's $1,500 gone.
Yeah, exactly.
And the guy with the red hat.
It's been interesting because what you talked about earlier about the precision of the reflectors, I think it's really important to also think about the grip part about it, because like lagging magic arms or whatever are going to drive you totally crazy. So to choose, or like stands when you close them and then they go like this.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful choosing good gear.
Yeah, yeah. And on the show with the ACLs, I had the reflectors from another company, and they had magnets. Mm-hmm. You know, and then sometimes you want to just tweak a little bit. That's the moment it's falling down, you know, because with these reflectors you can, you know, it's locked, but you can sometimes, because it's stable, you can just tip it a little bit. Yeah. And so that is really important, you know, that it's not like falling. Yeah. Falling down is always bad.
Falling down is always bad, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is just, you know, it took us 15 years on set to tweak it to that point where, you know, even with people being inspired by us, it's just not to understand, you know, what it does and where it goes, to understand where it's actually coming from. And I think at the heart of the soul of developing a system on set, I think makes all the difference to what we do now. Yeah,
yeah. That, for example, was what was I was talking to have a molten pole to create just a little bit fill light that was in a polar night. So it was in North Finland. So there was no sun out there, but I didn't know it, to be honest. But it's not so dark, the polar night. Yeah, the sky has still some color. So it was minus 28 degrees. It was quite fun. But in this case, we had, you know, this fill light was for a special position, and then there was somebody going through the forest, and at one point he was like stopping, and we were quite close with the camera, and he needs some eye light because it was so overcast. And then we found a perfect angle with the reflector that he's got an eye light on that position, but if he starts going on, you know, the reflected light wasn't interrupting the concept anymore. So they were coming down really close to the fill, and the reflector was not working there anymore. So that would be hard with something else, I guess.
I'm still struck by working at minus 28.
Yeah, I was wondering if you're wearing the right gear, it's less cold than you think.
Really?
Yeah, it was always like, yeah, maybe because it's dry, and everybody says, you know, it's dry, cold, it's easy. But when I flew back, my crew was wrapping, and I had this normal clothes on. I was 5 minutes out, I was like, I think I'm gonna die.
Oh my God. We're slowly running out of time. Are there any questions? You've been super silent. Yeah, please. There we go.
Ah, what I prefer, or? I would say 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm using all the 4 of them. Yeah, even the white one is much better than. I don't know why. Maybe you can explain. But the white is much better than the poly. It's more exact.
It's actually inspired by snow, subsurface scattering. It goes through the first layer, so hard reflector underneath, then it comes back out. So the idea was to imitate that a little bit.
And yeah. And what I thought also is good about the diffusion question is because normally if you go on a set, you have, let's say, 8 diffusion gels with you, but normally you don't use them. You find out on this kind of show, I use 4 or 5, not more than that. Because also for the DP, to have a decision, do I use that one or this one, blah, blah, blah. So he wants like the choice of 4 to 5 maximum, because he has other things to do than to think about if there's another diffusion that makes something a little bit different. And yeah, and that's also a reason that there are 4 diffusions, and that makes it really simple also for a DP, because he has the same thing as with gels, he has like the 4 choices he's normally using.
I think at the end of the day it's really important that everybody has their workflow, their tastes, their DPs that they work with, and to figure out the right tool. So I really like the idea of, that's what we always were striving for, the Lightbridge. Yeah. It has to become a standard. It's a standard in each truck. There's a tool out there you can use. And I think that's what's really important about it, If there's no other questions out there, then I'd say if anything comes to mind later, we're happy to see you at the Lightbridge booth up there in Hall 5. And thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Uwe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.